film sucks. Indie film sucks. It's the Indie Film Sucks podcast. Yeah.
Coming at you from the mean streets of St. Louis, from a basement on South Broadway, the Indie Film Sucks podcast. Because indie film is probably the worst use you can make of your tax return money. Well, tonight we have the legendary Jay Horton joining us on the podcast, who is indie filmmaking crowdfunding master as far as I'm concerned. And welcome to the show, Jay.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And yeah, just a brief, if you don't know who I am and who the show is, I'm Chris Grega. Normally I have Brock Roberts, Chris Mackey, Brittany O'Connell here with us on the Indie Film Sucks podcast, where we talk about the highs, lows, in betweens of true independent filmmaking. And you can find us on indiefilmsucks.com, Facebook, all that jazz. And yeah, with that stuff out of the way, Jay, let me ask you the famous question that we ask all our guest filmmakers. What is your suck?
Well, so my suck for indie film is probably also the cool thing about it. It constantly changes.
Yes.
You can be a glass half empty person, say, oh, that sucks, or you can be a glass half full person and be excited about it. The sucky part about it is I've been doing this now 25 years, right? So like I should have it pretty figured out, right? But it is still with 25 years in, like it is still a crapshoot. Like you can do things to, make your odds better. But at the end of the day, if you make a project and it can be a good project, and it's just wrong project, wrong time, it can fail and there's no predicting it, nothing at all. So, you could spend a year and a half on a, film that say you crowdfunded and raised, say, $100,000 for, raised another 50 in equity, worked on that film for, say, about 2 years from funding to distribution. And, that movie can come out and perform spectacularly bad, and then
Yep.
and the movie could turn out okay. Like people that watch it like it, but not enough people watch it. So for me, that's the biggest thing that kind of, and I suppose that, you could say the same thing for big budget films too. I mean, shoot, there's, big budget, $100 million films that fail spectacularly, and they have all the muscle in the world, which
Yep.
also goes to show you, which is ironic coming from someone who runs a distribution and marketing, YouTube channel, and this is how you market and say you can have all the marketing in the world, but if you have a project that the market doesn't want, or make a movie that just can't find its audience, it's going to fail. And you can push, this hypothetical $100,000 project I was just talking about. You could also spend another $20,000 on top of that on marketing and still fail.
Yep.
And then on the other hand, you can have you can cuss.
Oh yeah. As
Yeah,
much as you want.
you can have a shitbox documentary that you made 4 years ago that is quite honestly not good at all. And it can, in that same quarter that this $100,000 movie failed, that movie could make $30,000 in a quarter. You know, 4 year old piece of crap. So it's like you just never know. So it's what kind of sucks about it, but it's also what's exciting. Because by that same turn of fortune, this $100,000 movie, it could have hit big, but in this hypothetical situation, this one did not.
Yeah. Because I mean, I've been doing this about the same amount of time you have, 27 years.
Yeah, yeah.
with far less success. And when I started out, it the rule of thumb, the thought process was, okay, you make your first movie for $0 to $10,000. Then your second movie is like 20 to 30. Then
Mm.
your third one is, and that was the idea. You just keep going exponentially higher, and then eventually it's supposed to break through. Then you're at that mythical next level. But
Mm.
with this industry, man, you, it's like unless you're already born into wealth, it's all just a crapshoot. Because if you're already incredibly wealthy, then you can afford to throw away money. But
Mm.
if you're like most independent filmmakers, without a proverbial pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, it's it's basically a really difficult and potentially expensive to you lottery ticket that
Yeah.
that you can mitigate in some ways, right? I mean, you pick a genre that's sellable, like horror. Maybe you put some low level names in there. I mean, those things can help, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there is absolutely zero guarantees of success. And anyone who tells you, "Oh, if you follow these 10 easy steps, you will have a successful film," it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
lying.
Yeah, yeah. Or there's people out there that do have a formula, and that they found their market. Like I mentioned Detroit, the black filmmakers that are doing the Tubi stuff out of Detroit, and there's like I don't know half a dozen of those cats or maybe more, and they're turning over these, 20, 10, sometimes $30,000 movies and making a lot of money. But, they found an underserved market. They played to that market. There's another filmmaker in shoot, I forget where he's from. Somewhere in the middle of the country. And, is doing the same thing. For me, I've never found that sweet spot. So what I turned to was very, very low budget documentary stuff. I made narrative features as a hired gun filmmaker for many years. And, I did okay. I mean, I wasn't making like a lot of money, but I was being paid up front to direct these movies, low
Sure.
budget, 50 grand a piece, sometimes lower. And wasn't having a lot of luck on the ones I was producing myself because for whatever reason, I've just never had that like magic touch. Those guys knew what to make, when to make it. I never did. It seems like almost every time, at least in the first half of my career, I would, put a little bit of money into one or raise some money and put it out. It wouldn't do that well. But around 2018, somebody had talked me into trying to do some documentaries. I like watching documentaries, but I had no interest
Sure.
in making them. But because I'm an editor and, documentary, at least low budget docs, it's 90% editing. You
Yep.
shoot interviews for a couple of days and,
Yep.
you can do that for, I have a camera, I have a microphone, I can do that for free. I can do my post-production for free. I can make these like nothing documentaries for, besides my time and effort, like for nothing. So
Yeah.
my financial, output is very low. And then I'm also, because of how long I've been doing it, I'm a fast editor. I can make these things in 5 or 6 days. So like there was a time between 2018 and I don't know, like maybe 22 or 23 where I was making like 14 or 15 of these a year. And just like boom, anywhere from, 60 minutes to 90 minutes, a piece and just boom, boom, throw them out. And it became a numbers game. And, for every three, one would make a good amount of money. And then as I built that library up, I got to a point by, I think, the second year where I was making enough passive income from these things that I could start like taking a little time off and start, that's when I got into crowdfunding. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my passion stuff, but I'm going to do my big movies like once a year, once every year and a half, and then documentaries became my day job. So like that's how I make it. But I don't, I don't make it from like the horror movies or, the stuff that I really want to make.
Sure.
I mean, most of the time, that's a break even proposition kind of at best, for me personally anyway. I'll make a little bit for the investors sometimes, or I can have one like this hypothetical movie that just came out. I didn't make, and, nobody made anything except for the MG we got, from the distributor.
But I mean, for low budget indie, break even's a pretty big win, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. Yeah. I'm not complaining. But it's like so, and I think now I kind of have the best of both worlds. I can do these docs and I talk about not having passion for them, but I have passion for the process of making movies, whether it's a documentary or not, or a narrative or not. So like I do these docs and like I really enjoy the process. I like talking to the people, it's not always subjects I'm interested in, but I'm interested in people that are passionate about stuff. So I like doing them. And then it gives me the runway I need to take, 6 months off to shoot something like Apex Predators Club or A Hard Place or Craving before it.
Yep.
You know, so like that's kind of where I am. And then, I did the crowdfunding thing for a while, but to be honest, I probably won't do that again.
Do you think with Indiegogo changing things up so much, you think crowdfunding's kind of dead?
I don't know if it's dead. I'm always hesitant to say anything's dead. I think my particular method of crowdfunding is if it's not dead, it's dying. Like I don't think so. I raised between me and Mahal on Apex, we raised about almost $300,000 between all the campaigns prior to the changes. Like the changes started affecting my last campaign, like after like it was like in the middle of the last campaign when the changes happened. And I don't think because one of the major changes is you can't do secret perks anymore. And like Secret Perks was like Michael Mahal, God rest his soul. That was one of the things he really drilled into me in the first campaign was like that we raised a good chunk of our money through secret perks. And those are perks that you don't offer necessarily to the public. Like you have people that you've worked with before and say, hey, we got this like special perk for you. It might be at a discount or it might be packaged with something special, whatever that is. But I guess they say for transparency reasons now you can't do secret perks anymore. So
Hmm.
like that takes a lot off the table. I also another thing that both I and the Mahals were using were pay to play. So a lot of actors were paying to come on set and have roles. And regardless of how someone people might feel about that, that method has become so known and there's so many people doing it now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, like, if I was doing a campaign today and trying to do that, and without the secret perks, I don't think I could sell the roles for as much as I did before. I don't, because now, like, the competition for that is, because people are undercutting it. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people doing it now. It's, and a lot of people have got wise to it because honestly, there's like three different types of people that I've seen that do pay to play. Some of them are like I worked with an actor. I won't say their name because I don't want to out
Sure,
them.
sure.
That I worked with them on one of my three movies, and this particular actor was in their 40s, had taken all the acting classes, auditioned all the time, was a good, pretty good actor, and just wasn't booking anything, couldn't get
Sure.
anything. And then was like, and saw my campaign, was like, you know what, I know you, I trust you, and man, if I got to pay $1,000 to know for sure that I'm gonna get this role, I want to do it, and they did. There's other people that are basically film tourists. It's the kind of people that go to horror conventions and pay $500 to get a video with Freddy Krueger. But
Sure.
here, they can pay that same 500 or $1,000 and be in a scene with one of those people. So there's those people, and then there's people that think it's going to jumpstart their career and that's just not going to happen. What happens once you start paying for roles, that's how people will see you. you know,
Sure.
and that's all they'll only want you in their movie if you can put money into it, because raising money for a movie is the hardest thing. These movies wouldn't exist without some of this stuff. So I think it's really hard to break out of that box with people. And I've seen so many that, again, they trying to kickstart careers doing it. And I don't like, I've known so many of them, and most of them, it's not that they're like, have no talent or anything like that, but most of them don't take it seriously. The craft part. They
Sure.
talk about how they want to be actors and they want to make it, but I could probably count on one hand the number of pay to play actors I've met that actually study craft, you know. So anyway, I think that the pay to play thing is collapsing in on itself. I think the days of people raising the two and $300,000 at the level for the types of movies I was doing or am doing is, I think that is probably done, or at least for now. I'd be real curious to see. There's, a couple of filmmakers out there that do, similar level stuff. And one of them's running a campaign now, but I haven't kept track of it. So I'm curious how their campaign is doing. And I know another filmmaker who was raising just about as much as me per movie. I know their last one only raised like, I want to say 30 or 40,000, and down from like close to 200 on their last one, you know.
I mean, that's a big drop.
Yeah, it's a big drop. So I don't know. I don't know.
So it makes me think of so you've heard of Markiplier or Mark Plier?
Oh
He
yeah,
did,
the YouTube guy. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Iron
Iron
Lung.
Lung. Yeah, yeah.
So I had a debate with a few people, and some people were saying that, oh, his success is a huge win for indie film. And my point was, it's not a win for indie film at all. It's a win for brand building. It's a win
Yeah, 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 yeah.
for getting followers.
I think it has some value in the fact that it inspires people, like in the same way that,
Sure.
Robert Rodriguez and the guys did back in the day. But people didn't realize even then those guys were still lottery winners.
Yeah.
But it inspired people. And I think like getting into film, you have to have a little bit of naivete. Like
Yes.
you have to have a little bit of like, I'm gonna be a rock star.
Yes.
I'm gonna,
Yes.
because if you don't, if you actually knew the reality,
You'd never
most
do it.
most people never do it. Yeah.
I mean, I
So I
it
see the value in that. But
yes.
yeah, it you know, the guy, I'm not, discounting his success, man. He
No,
worked
me
hard
neither.
to build his brand. It's great, but he is also, at the end of the day, he's still a lottery winner.
Yeah.
There are other people out there that are doing those same steps, and they don't have, millions of YouTube followers. There's a bunch of things that go right for something like that to happen. Or Stuckman that did the Chris Stuckman, the reviewer who did the like $1 million Kickstarter couple of years ago. It's like the same thing. I mean, again, I'm not discounting their work, or the Terrifier guy.
Yeah.
Again, worked his butt off, but still at the end of the day, there's an element of,
Luck.
yeah, of luck, because there are other people out there that have worked just as hard that might even have better stuff. I'm not talking about me now. Just, I'm assuming, but he had a thing and it just hit just right, and bam. And yeah, it took years, and I'm not, again, not discounting it, but like that kind of success is like there's an element of luck, and then there's people like me who, I'm just persistent as fuck. I just keep doing the things over and over and over again. And I had bad years, man, in my first 10 years. Like when I was directing for hire, it wasn't like, just job after job. I
Sure.
was freelancing, I had months where I did really well, but then, I had months where I'm eating ramen noodles, and, I didn't have a family, so like I was able to kind of survive like that for a decade. But a lot of people don't have that luxury.
No, freelance, that's a tough road. And most people who do freelance in this realm, they very little of that freelance is purely creative. I mean, a lot of it's like corporate stuff and industrial video and weddings and all sorts of stuff that's not necessarily filmmaking because you know it's it's hard to make a living doing this sort of thing. Like it's very hard. Most people
Yeah.
don't. The great percentage of people don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think some of that and being Gen X, we were kind of told like every movie was like, oh, the underdog's gonna win, and if you
Yeah.
want it bad enough, it's gonna happen. If you build it, they will come. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so you kind of have that going into filmmaking. And like every book I read when I first started out was like, punk rock, make art, and just finish the film, and that's
Yeah.
winning.
Yeah.
And then you get there, and then you get to the post production, which is like distribution and that horror show,
Mm.
and and it's like, man, where's my prize? Where's my money? Where's
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I know I hit a point because I always when I started, I always wanted to be, Spielberg or
mhm,
Tarantino, but there was a moment, not a moment, but like it took I can't point to a single moment, but like gradually over the course of, my 25 years, at a certain point it hit me that like that is most likely never going to happen. In all likelihood, like I'm never going to be known that way, and I'll never make that much money doing
yeah,
movies. But, like I gradually, through persistence and doing it over and over and over again and building up a library, I got to a point where, all of a sudden I was making a living just off the movies. And then a few more years went by and I'm making a pretty good living off of just these movies, and I'm not, I'm not a wealthy man, but I do okay. And that's all I do. And it was just through nose to the grindstone. And people outside of, like my YouTube channel or people maybe know me from Facebook, people don't really know me as a
sure.
filmmaker. Regular people, nobody would know it. And like, I don't get, acclaim or, anything like that. I just make these little movies that go unnoticed and every now and then one hits like just right, makes a good about a buddy, and I have 100 of them now. So
I mean, hey man, you're doing light years better than me, brother.
yeah.
But I think I really like the idea, the the quick, fast, cheap documentary idea because
Yeah. Yeah.
they're so easy to turn those things around, and
Yeah.
that's what I've been leaning towards. Like, man, I can make because I can shoot, I can edit, I can do all these things. I've got the gear, I have the experience. Uh, if it cost you zero to maybe $2,000 to make a documentary,
Yeah.
that's easy to make your money back.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Well, easier.
easier
Yeah,
than
easier. Yeah.
say, 20, 30, 50, $200,000. Like
Yeah.
the higher up you go, yeah, you can have more bells and whistles, but it's
Yeah.
harder to get that ROI.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's why I turned to crowdfunding on some of my bigger narrative stuff because it's just such a dicey situation to raise, 100, $200,000 in equity because, just like, morally, like to return that money, return
Oh
something,
yeah.
you know. And the thing is, what people don't understand, people that invest in a 100,000 or $200,000 movie, they are typically not rich people. There are people that like maybe they had a good tax return,
Yep.
maybe they had a good year and they're looking to try something exciting or something
Yep.
different, and most of them, man, they're not rich and they do eventually need at least some of that back, so like I think it's, straight up uh I wouldn't say criminal, but like a little immoral to go out there and, raise $250,000 off equity financing if you have absolutely no idea how you're going to return that. If you don't have it somewhat leveraged, whether
Yeah.
that's tax credits or, whether that's, foreign pre-sales or whatever it is. If you have absolutely no plan and raise $250,000 on spec from people that aren't super freaking rich, you're not a great person, in my opinion.
But I think that's a lot of filmmakers because,
Well,
people,
yeah. Well, and most filmmakers too, again, back to the naivete thing,
yeah,
think, yes, they're going to make all this money. And that's, I mean, I think expectations, false expectations are what kills a lot of careers and
yes.
what, because it's people think, like they make the movie and it's just going to make money. No, like no matter what, it's going to make some money. And that is not true. You can make a movie and it can literally make nothing. I mean, pennies,
Yes.
pennies. And you could spend $100,000 on that movie and make pennies. It can happen.
And I think most filmmakers, because I know when I started out, this was my mindset. Most filmmakers don't realize nobody cares about your shit as much as you do.
Yeah.
And your mom's opinion of your work. I mean, it's great if she's behind you, but it's not valid.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if your mom says, "Oh, you should be in Hollywood. You're just as good as Spielberg." Thanks, mom. I thank you. No one else thinks so, but but thank you very much.
It's so funny. I could always tell, like my mom, she passed away about 7 years ago, but she never loved my movies, and but she would super supportive. Like she sees that that was really good. And you could tell she really didn't like, she was trying to think of something nice to say. You know, that's how my mom was.
I think my mom she likes some of my stuff because
Yeah.
not everything I've done is horror,
Yeah.
but yeah, my
Yeah.
mom also passed away. Well, I guess 16 years ago this year, so that's a
Yeah.
bummer.
Yeah.
So I guess another thing we're dealing with is Film Hub and streaming. How do you feel about those changes there?
I'm not a huge fan of the changes. I so my feelings are complicated on Film Hub. I have a lot of movies up through Film Hub, and I make a lot of money with Film Hub.
Sure.
Um, However, like with my model, because I put out these, cheap movies, I put out a lot of them,
Yeah.
and a lot of them don't make a lot. So, I mean, now enough of them make enough that I do well, but if I'm paying $500 a pop for QC, plus I'm paying another $200 to $300 for closed captioning, I'm spending almost $1,000 per movie on, some movies that don't never even make that much.
Yeah.
You know, mine's a a high volume, model. So those prices, like I mean, they're basically going to price me out of submitting films to them. Like I've already slowed down, and I'll probably like eventually, at least right now, I have no plans to upload a new one there.
Do you think there's any legit alternatives like Studio Dome or Indie Rights? Indie Rights is more of a standard distributor.
They are, and the thing about, and I love indie rights. The thing about indie rights is, they do curate. They get, I forget what she was telling me, like 40 or 50 submissions a week, and they take two a week. I mean, it used to be, a higher ratio, but now they're pickier. They pick up two projects out of 60. So they're
Yeah.
not picking up everything now. So, the cool thing about Film Hub was like, it was like no curation, you could put stuff through them, no costs. And, I personally think where they went wrong is they should have curated more at the start. Like they should have been a little pickier about what they were taking. Because I honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I think what they're doing now with all the tiers and the prices,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's their way of curating. I think it's
Sure.
their way of getting rid of the chaff, of the people that are, can't even create a poster in the right dimensions and are wasting all their time, trying to go through QC and whatnot. That's what I think it is. But I think that in doing that, they're trying to position themselves has a bigger player. But I think that their core was this, like lower budget indie thing, and it feels
Yeah.
like I don't know what their future is, but I know that I am going to be using them less.
So is there a viable alternative, do you think?
I mean, no, not really. Not really. I mean, there's companies out there like StreamGo Media that does a similar thing. I think they take 30% instead of 20, and they pay quarterly, and it's like a quarter back. So, it's like there's nothing like Film Hub. I'm really surprised that somebody hasn't like came in and done something like what they're doing. But no, I mean, you can do Bitmax, but you're gonna pay just as much, if not more. I mean, it, if you, I mean, honestly, I mean, I'm kind of complaining about it for my
Yeah,
model, but most people don't follow my model. So like
true.
if you're making a $20,000 movie and you're confident, you're gonna make say $10,000, $500 for a QC is not a bad deal.
No,
And you can still do the non-tiered, free stuff. You don't get the same analytics, but honestly, analytics aren't going to help you that much anyway. So, I say do the free one, pay the $500 QC. It's probably the it's probably still a good bet for a lot of indie filmmakers. It's just no longer good for people who are doing backyard movies. If
sure.
you're doing a backyard level movie, just put it on YouTube because that's really where it should have been in the first place. To be quite honest, oversaturation is one of the things that's really hurting our market right now. And a
Yep,
place like Film Hub, they made it possible for backyard filmmakers, in the middle of the country to throw out these really awful, like super low budget movies that have flooded our marketplace and drove down value. I know that sounds shitty, especially after I preached for so many years, just go out there and do it. But, I mean, there's a lot of people that just they shouldn't be doing it.
I mean, you're
And,
absolutely
and
right
hey,
because
and hey, I might be one of them. I'm not saying that I'm like I figured out a way to make my money, but maybe I'm not a great filmmaker, but I do my stuff. But there's some people out there that they do neither. They're just out there creating noise.
yeah, I mean
Sorry.
that,
Yeah.
that no, I hear you, man. Because I mean, most people, again, unless you're born into wealth, unless you're born into, like your Sophia Coppola or whatever, unless you're those people, most people start out making no budget films with their buddies and friends and family and no clue what they're doing, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But now the ability to put it out there, like through Film Hub,
Yeah.
and it really has flooded the market with just a lot of hot garbage. And I'm not saying my
Oh,
stuff's great. I'm not saying,
yeah.
I'm Francis Ford Coppola or I'm fit to wash his feet, but I like to think at this point I kind of know what I'm doing. And I think a lot of people don't, and I don't know how you're gonna get around that fact that the market is so flooded.
Well, what I think is happening because market changes all the time, and I think the market is self-correcting. Like so yes, you still have Film Hub, you could still pay your $500. You might be able to get up through somebody like Indie Rights, or StreamGo or one of these other avenues or Bitmax. But truth of the matter is the platforms are taking less and less of these movies.
Yeah.
Like Tubi has been super selective, and they're getting more selective. Amazon got real selective, and I think, like, honestly, I think we're heading back to a more gatekept, like, curation of major platforms. Like, there'll be new ones that pop up, but all the majors, I think the days of making a very cheap, poor backyard film and getting it on Amazon and Tubi and all the major platforms. I think that's gone or almost gone.
Yeah, and I don't think that's really a bad thing, to be
Yeah,
honest.
no, like what I'm saying is, who knows? Maybe 6 months to a year from now, because it takes, almost a year to see, these changes like take effect, but who knows, people that are making decent stuff and still getting it out, maybe they'll be worth more a year from now. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe it'll be less.
So how do you feel about traditional distributors at this point? Because if the alternative was going to Film Hub or something similar to that,
Yeah, well, I never had any problems, like major problems with distributors in general. There are bad ones out there, but I don't think it's all bad. And I don't think that I think 99% are not out there to rip people off. Markets are just tough. They are. And there are bad distributors. But my particular model, like I said, I make high high quantity,
hmm,
like lower value films, and documentaries. So there's not a lot of distributors that are going to be interested in that.
sure.
Very few. Even like Indie Rights is, one of the more permissive distributors, and they won't take everything I make, and I'm friends with Linda, and she's not going to take every documentary I make, like, so I don't know. For bigger films, I still think the way to go is traditional distribution. And it's a crapshoot as to whether it works out or
Yeah.
not, you know. But yeah, so I don't have a problem with it.
What do you consider a bigger film?
Like anything, over six figures, if you're like 100 grand or 200 grand or 250 grand. I mean, the Apex Predators Club, which I just finished, when all is said and done, that's going to be almost 450,000. And it's not feasible to, unless you get lucky to make
Yeah.
that self-distributing, or, like just through Film Hub, or, even through somebody like Indie Rights. It's like I have to look past those things. And then, maybe I'll get lucky, maybe I won't.
I mean, but you had the Mahal brothers behind that as well. So do you
Hmm.
think that made a pretty big difference as far as leveling things up?
I mean, it definitely, our combined resources helped raise more money. Michael died right towards the end of the first campaign. So I've
Hmm.
been on my own since then. Um, but yeah, it didn't hurt.
Oh, sure. So what advice would you throw out there to young hopeful filmmakers?
Um, Again, this sounds like kind of negative, but it's like if you can find joy in doing anything else, like something more traditional, something more stable. If you like law, or you like math, or you like teaching, if you can if you can find joy in life doing those things, like do that,
Hmm.
and there's also, it doesn't mean that you have to stop, pursuing the film thing, but like I know a guy is a director. He's in his 50s. He's made like 7 or 8 movies, and I forget what his day gig is, but it's like he like works for the government or something. Like he makes good money, like high six figures. And once a year or twice a year, this guy, because he takes 2 vacations a year, or I'm sorry, he takes 3 vacations a year. 2 of the vacations, he makes movies. He makes 2 movies a year, does it on his vacation, pays for it himself, and then takes a real vacation. But you know what I mean? And he has the disposable income to do it because he has a nice job, or if you're not even making that much money, your regular job, and
Hmm.
you're once every like 2 years, and you can put, like 5 grand in or something like that, and make a little movie, or make something free with your friends, which, what a lot of people are doing. You can do that.
Yeah.
But unless you just absolutely have to all out pursue this, find something else.
Well, I'm sure nobody wants to hear that, but I think that's the hard, honest truth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I make a pretty good living for my films, but guys, I had a rough go getting to here, and I'm still not like what most people would consider to be made it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, and anyway, I'm nothing special.
Well, I mean,
I'm just persistent.
and I think you had a really smart approach because you didn't start out with that approach, right? I mean, did you start out with more traditional, I want to be a filmmaker, I'm going to make movies and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The only thing that saved me fairly early on was I made a couple of really cheap movies on my own. One for like 5 grand, me and a couple of friends put some money into, and we got it distributed. And then I made one for 25,000 right after that. Again, I just talked to a producer into paying for it. But I caught the eye of a producer from New Orleans that was getting ready to make a slate of low budget movies, like
mm,
around 50 grand movies, with like one B name,
yep.
and he knew that I could get those types of movies done. So like they started hiring me to direct, and I directed like 12 movies for them, and then caught the eye of another producer that was trying to do it at a slightly bigger level, same business model. And I directed like 3 or 4 movies for him. And then, in between, I was always, I would produce one of my own, but I always, I was watching these guys making all this money. I was just like, oh my gosh, I gotta get this money. But I didn't understand, like I always thought like I just produce what I want and it's gonna make that kind of money. But no, they
Yeah.
were making very specific movies for very specific audiences. And I just didn't understand that. Like I thought if I make my Monsters in the Woods, it's gonna be huge. That's just not usually the case.
What kind of genres were these movies you were doing?
Oh man, I did all kinds. I started in black Christian movies. And then a lot of these were black films, black Christian movies, and then we did thrillers, we did some family films, we did a talking dog movie. There's a distributor that still like talks about that talking dog movie as like one of the A plus like low budget earners. Like that movie probably made more money than anything I've ever made. Of course, I didn't have any kind of piece of that, but it was a talking dog movie called Socks.
Ah,
Yeah. But yeah, so all different kinds.
and you were just a hired gun coming on for those, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I would direct them and I would usually edit them.
But no back end, but it would lead to another gig, I'm assuming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I worked for the same people 10 or 12 times and then another company after that 4 or 5 times. And there was a few others in between there. But almost all were just, people would see a successful model and they were trying to repeat it. So like, and I just so happened to be tied to 3 different producers who became very successful making those
Mm.
movies. So people would, look up, well, who's doing their movies? And then they would try to hire me to do their movies. So try to do the same thing.
Would you at least make a pretty good chunk of change for each one, or was it just kind of enough
Mm.
to?
Yeah, not really. It was
Eh,
okay. It was okay. I was doing pretty good with the one company. I was doing pretty good per movie, but there was a point where we were making so many movies, they put me on this like monthly salary. And I won't say how much it was, but
sure.
what they did though is like the first month that I agreed to it, we made 3 movies that month.
Three,
Like or
three
4.
feet,
We made
four,
4, yeah. We
four
did
features in a
yeah,
month.
because yeah, they would shoot movies in like typically like 5 to 7 days, but they were also experimenting with 1 day features. So there was one month where we did a 6 day feature, we did a 4 day feature, and then we did 2 1 day features, maybe 3.
I
And
mean,
then
these got to be like one location and a tiny cast.
yeah, kind of. I mean, like you would shoot like the one was taking place at a church, so we shot it at a real church. And we converted one of the upstairs rooms in the church into an apartment, and shot 3 cameras, almost sitcom like. But again, my editing experience came in really handy. So like, I was able to like they're covered like a movie. They have close-ups,
Sure.
inserts. But yeah, I'm not saying that they're good, but they're better than you would think.
Oh, no, no, no. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not expecting it to be
yeah,
Apocalypse Now or something,
yeah. Yeah,
but
yeah.
still.
Well, it's funny. You can see that there's one, man, I can't even remember the name of it now. Sunday School? No. Shit, I can't remember the name of it. It was a church one. And you can see because we shot it, all in one day. So we shot it
Yeah.
all in order, like so it's chronological for the most part. You did it by location, but it's pretty much
Sure.
shot in order. And you can see as the movie progresses, like things getting more rushed, coverage getting less until it gets to the last scene and there's like, just the basic three pieces of coverage and nothing else, because like we basically had time to do like one take, one setup. So it's three cameras, just bam. And it's like you can feel it like unravel because like the last scene is just fucking horrible. I wish I
But
could
I'm
remember that one.
uh, a one day feature film that's anyway coherent.
Yeah, yeah.
That's still a hell of an accomplishment.
Yeah, I did one, two, three. I did three in one day and one in 2 days. The
So,
the the 2 day one was on Netflix for a long time and it was on Hulu for a long time. It's called When a Woman's Fed Up. You probably still find it somewhere. It's probably on YouTube now. And it basically looks like a sitcom, like a
sure,
sitcom. But I mean, we did it. I mean, and they would get like, it's like B-level names, and
sure.
instead of them just being in the movie for 5 minutes, though, they were in the entire.
Whole
They were
thing.
starring in the movies.
That's
So
awesome, man.
the When a Woman's Fed Up had it was the not Lorenz Tate, but the other guy from Menace to Society was the star of it, and it was funny. Yeah.
So, so what kind of crew would you have for these?
I mean, you'd have like a regular, like low budget crew. I mean, not like, I mean, fairly skeleton, but you'd have DP was usually his own camera op, but then he'd have an AC with him. There'd usually be a second or a third camera, each with ACs. You'd have the hair and makeup were very important to these people. So like you would always have usually separate hair and makeup. You would have, caterer, or a facsimile thereof. Um, Gaffer, grip. Um, there was a couple of movies we did where we did have a special effects team because of like thrillers, so we had a couple of gun gags and
Yeah.
blood and stuff. So yeah, like a regular like micro budget crew.
So you're probably not doing fancy camera moves. I mean, it's all pretty much static stuff, or were you able to,
On
do
the
some?
one day features,
Yeah.
no. The one day features, some pans maybe. In the church one I'm talking about, there were a couple of dolly moves in that one. Like again, like the first couple of scenes like feel pretty good, and then it just gets like less and less. But like the 5 day ones, yeah, like we would like those were, we always would have a slider on set
Yeah.
and dolly. I did one called The Other Side. I forget the DP. He was a really good op though. He did he did like professional football shooting, but
Okay.
he was a great camera op. And we had some really cool camera moves in that.
So
And then
what kind
sorry,
of
go ahead.
I'm sorry. What kind of post turnaround time would you have?
Usually pretty quick because like these were almost like Roger Corman movies. So like they'd have a poster and a release date when we were shooting. So like those like that slat when we did like four of them, I want to say that was like in April that year, and three of them were on the shelves by end of June or July. It's like so it was like really quick.
Oh,
Usually a
wow.
few weeks a piece.
But I mean, if because you were the editor too, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I mean, and if you're shooting, pretty simple coverage, you can knock that out pretty quick, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that's always been kind of my superpower is like I know when a thing is as good as I can get it, like pretty quickly. I don't need to agonize and, like recut a scene a million times. I know my skill level. I know the footage. Like I can even like Apex Predators Club, which I'm cutting right now. Like I don't spend as much time as a lot of editors do. I know the footage. I
Yeah.
know my coverage. I do a couple of passes and I'm like, okay, besides little tweaks, this is it. And I can cut something like that well in, 30 days, and back in the day, I do these ones, sometimes 2, 3 weeks.
Man, that's just wild. It's like a doing a feature in a day. It's like a 48-hour film project, but it's a but
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
feature
yeah.
film.
It was something else. I used to tell people it was kind of like doing like shot clock pool. Like you don't really have time to line up your shot. You just take it. Just take it. Just take it, and hope it works. It was so like there was something exciting about it. I mean, like part of the reason I even agreed to any of those was like I just wanted to see if I could do it.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
like the scripts weren't great. Like, I was just like, yeah, just see if we could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect David Mamet for a 1 day feature, but that
Yeah.
that's still really awesome, dude. Yeah, I had no idea you were doing those, and that's
Yeah.
pretty damn cool.
Did a few. Did a few.
So speaking of Apex, how does that compare to Hard Place?
Like in quality or
Uh,
just experience.
Quality, experience, the whole thing.
So, it's not the biggest budget thing I've ever directed, but it's the biggest thing that I've ever had this much control over and directed. So like I did for the company after the company I worked for, I did a couple that were around the $500,000 mark. But this is the first time where and after Michael Mahal died, it basically became, my production.
Yeah,
I kept the Mahal Empire moniker. Sonny still worked on it, Michael's brother, but it wasn't the same. Like I took over the nuts and bolts of it by that point. And it was daunting. So it was bigger than I was used to. And like, I thought I had a handle on the crowdfunding thing and what it was going to be like, but I'd never done a Mahal thing. And they have, like, it's a huge, huge cast. Like on a hard place, I want to say like the total was between like I don't know 35 and 45 people,
hmm
actors total. Like and a lot of those were pretty small parts, but that was it, like 50 people maybe tops. On Apex, it was over 100, and a lot of these were like fairly beefy roles. So
yeah,
like yeah, yeah. Which brings me to the other thing about crowdfunding. I think that like there's a limit to how good you can make movies like that because it's not a matter of like the actors not being good or not, but it's a matter of creating all of these extra things for people to do that don't necessarily need to be in the movie.
yeah,
So like anyway, that was really hard to juggle that and make that all like work. And then, I made a couple of fatal well not fatal, but crippling crew decisions which I won't get into, but two department heads in particular caused a lot of problems and I ended up having to so, we shot the first leg of the movie, I
yeah,
think it's 12 day shoot and spent like 340 I think and then had to go back and shoot another 5 days at a cost of another 60,000, so because I had to go back and fix a lot of things, and one thing that it really taught me, I was really excited to do the movie initially because like I'm working with all new people, and that's exciting, like
yeah,
work with a new DP, work with a new, a costume designer, work with all these new people. And I'm not throwing shade at any of those people, but what it really made me realize is like when you have a good team, stick with your team, you know, because
yep,
a lot of it wasn't necessarily about good and bad, but it was just like the wrong person. Like
Yep.
the wrong person in this role. Not like they might be very, very good at their job. They were just the wrong person for me in this project, you know. And I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of filmmakers at all levels work with the same people over and over again. And I think one of the most critical relationships is director and DP
Mm,
because I almost never shoot my own stuff, so I want to work with the cinematographer. And if you don't have that immediate, like where you guys are like that,
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
it,
definitely.
it ain't gonna work. It ain't
Yeah,
gonna fly. And that's really any major department head. If you and the effects person aren't seeing things eye to eye, then
yeah,
it ain't gonna
yeah,
work. I mean,
yeah,
I've never had a problem with sound. Never never had a
yeah,
sound. I
yeah,
mean, all sound people are usually the most kind of calm, level-headed, cool, collected people in my experience. But yeah, other department heads, if there's you're right, it's not necessarily that they're bad, but if you're not a good fit for one another, it's going to cause endless
totally.
headaches.
Yeah, yeah. I worked with a lot of like really experienced, like, good like artists, good workers, just on different pages,
Yep.
and just, it was just but we got through, and I mean, it looks spectacular. It's my best looking movie. We shot it all on these vintage Japanese anamorphic lenses, Kowas. I was originally going to shoot it on what are they called? Lomos, which is an old Russian lens. But the camera house, like they were being rehoused and we couldn't get them in time, so we
Uh,
used Kowas. But the Kowas are like it's like 100 grain lenses. They're really nice. And it has a cool look. The cast all turned out really well. And when we did the reshoots, the actors that came back for the reshoots like really stepped up. Like they were good in the first shoot, but they were really good in the reshoot. So it was just a better vibe on set in the reshoots, and I think people responded to that. Like there was a lot of stress, and not we weren't like shouting at each other or nothing, but just like there was like an ill vibe.
that's a bummer. And so
Yeah,
by reshoot you mean you reshot scenes, not just pickups.
yeah, 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 yeah. I'd say 30-40%
That,
reshot. Yeah.
that's pretty big chunk.
Yeah, it was a big chunk. I kind of describe it like solo reshoots,
Man,
you know,
I don't know if I'd
or
use that
or
because
or Rogue One or something.
well, Rogue One worked out pretty well, but
Yeah, yeah,
Solo,
yeah. Well,
I
but I just meant like in the level of
okay.
reshooting, not in the final product.
I mean,
But
personally,
yeah,
I like Solo. I thought it was a fine.
yeah, it was fun. I just meant like how they, basically had to reshoot half the movie. It was kind of.
Yeah,
And it wasn't half, but it was quite a bit. I mean, we did 12 days and the reshoots were 5 days, and we shot a higher, shoot ratio in those five
yeah.
days. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure when all's said and done, I'll have to count it up, but but for right now, yeah.
So where are you at in the post process?
I am almost done with my first cut. I don't really do like assemblies. I pretty much go straight to like rough cut, and my rough cuts are like fairly fine. I'm just not doing sound effects yet.
Okay.
Um, but I think I got like 15 minutes left to go. And it's a fairly, cause it was a long script, so like it's fairly lengthy right now. We'll see where it turns out. But yeah, I'll be done probably with my first edit before the end of this month, and then I'll be ready for uh score and the visual effects.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on like, premiere screening and festival runs and all that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely do a premiere, probably in either LA or Vegas or maybe both. That's part of the Indiegogo thing. So there's a lot of people that, put money in to come to the premiere. So, we'll do that. Um, I submitted to some bigger festivals for Hard Place. I'll probably do the same thing for this. I mean, we'll see when I finish because it's like with horror, most of the good festivals are between October and like December, you
Yeah.
know, you pretty much got to wait another year. So I'm not going to wait another year. So if I do make the cutoffs to submit to some of the festivals, I will. But I'm not sure. I always kind of as far as release plans, I always kind of uh, play a wait and see kind of thing. Like, where does it turn out? How does it turn out? You know? And it's right now until I start fine tuning it a little bit more. I'm not quite sure. I think it's better than a hard place by a good margin. It's and we'll pace is probably my biggest thing right now because it's really long, and I've like I I think my initial cut's going to be like probably 220.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
long.
yeah, no. I mean, I'm going for 90 minutes at the end of the day, but it's like figuring out what to cut out and, where to tighten it out. And I also, in my initial cuts, I tend to let things breathe a little bit more than
Sure.
what I want to fine cut. Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're going to do a physical release as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you're going to go with the distributor for that, or you're going to self release that the
Mm,
physical.
Oh yeah, the whole thing will most likely go through a distributor. But again, I'm not to be honest, I don't even know what to do with distribution anymore. It changes so much. So
I know.
and part of me still is like, well, man, maybe I should just take the Shure money and go the Film Hub Indie Right route. I honestly don't know.
I mean, you're absolutely right with that answer because and in 6 months it could be something completely different.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally.
So
Yeah.
what do you have next coming up, if anything?
Um, I'm probably gonna take a little bit of a break. This one like took a lot out of me. Like the first leg of production was very kind of traumatic for me and financially because this wasn't just investor money. This is a lot of my money. I've never put in quite so much money into a movie before, and honestly, I put more into this than I could afford. So like I'm paying catch up right now. Um, so between the financial thing and just, being a little shell shocked with the sheer amount of people, my next thing's probably going to be small. Like, it's a contained thriller probably. I have a script I like. I've been wanting to make for a while. That's basically a 5 character piece and all pretty much takes place in one place.
So
Um,
something on the level of Craving.
Yeah, even smaller because like Craving still had quite a few people. I think it was 12 or 13. So yeah, but yeah, something similar. Yeah, a little less horror, a little more like thriller. It's kind
Okay.
of a Misery-esque thing.
Okay, man. Well, I feel like we covered a bunch of stuff tonight.
Yeah,
You have anything else you want to add?
nope.
Well, I got to say it was a pleasure having you on the show. I feel like we talked about the highs, the lows, and in betweens of true independent filmmaking here on the Indie Film Sucks podcast, brought to you by 88 Millimeter Productions. Jason Horton, man, thank you very much for coming on. Man, I love the 1 day feature. I think that's that's probably the greatest indie film accomplishment anybody could do is make a competent uh, that you can follow from start to finish 1 day feature. That's pretty damn awesome. All right, brother. Well, I guess that'll do it.
Indie film sucks. Indie film sucks. It's the Indie Film Sucks podcast. Yeah.